Welcome to the UDRCast, the Uncover, Discover, Recover podcast that I started about 4 years ago. I like to say coming to you live from the recovery capital of Canada, which is Calgary, Alberta, and I do believe that we are a leader in recovery here. I have an awesome special guest today, a guy I met there probably about 8 months ago. We got connected through a friend of ours on the Instagram community, and I'd seen you around for a little while on Instagram. Didn't know anything about you. But since I've met you, we've had a good connection, and we've stayed in touch, and we're kind of doing our own thing, but always touching base. So I want to introduce my buddy TJ. How's it going, buddy?
Really good, Bill. Thanks for having me, and I appreciate it.
Yeah, dude. So, yeah, how did we meet? We met through a potential of being... How did we meet?
Well, we met through Alex from Sober Active Canada. She's the one that connected us. And then, when I first moved here and was kind of looking to connect, I remember we sat out at the park and had a coffee and got to know each other a little bit better.
Oh, yeah, down here on 17th Ave in Calgary, yeah. Mm. And our first little venture didn't go the way that we would hope, but we didn't have any plan that it was going to go that way anyway. We were hopeful, right? And maybe collaborating as consultants for one of the Indigenous communities treatment center out in these parts, and it just didn't go that way so far anyway, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, for sure. And I think, time will tell, and Creator will put us wherever he needs. And it was a cool opportunity to go down there and sit and hear what some of the challenges were, and more will be revealed. I think that's a long process to get to the finish line with that one.
Yeah, yeah. And a few things for our watchers and listeners is TJ owned a treatment center on the coast. It was called?
Coastal Recovery Community.
And how long did you own that?
About 3 years.
And you have had your own journey of substance abuse for many years prior to that?
Absolutely.
And since that, you've moved out to Calgary. Why'd you move out here?
I moved out here for new beginnings. I don't think I was being challenged to the full potential of the impact that I could create. I moved out here, because recovery capital of Canada, right? I wanted to make more of an impact, and I felt like BC had a lot of challenges with the decriminalization and the kind of safe supply. I know harm reduction does play a part in people's journey, and you have to meet them where they're at, but I just foreseen a lot of damage being caused, and people are dying, right? Mm-hmm.
And so you're here, and did you know prior to coming out here that Calgary's recovery community was fairly strong?
A little bit. I have been to the Recovery Capital Conference probably 4 years in a row now. So it was, something that I really thought about. But when I first, made the decision that I was going to pack up shop and come here, I had no idea. I didn't really have a plan. I just really trusted in my higher power on that journey for sure.
Wow. So you just came out here with not knowing really what was going to happen.
Yeah, and I mean, I had a big identity crisis because Coastal Recovery Community was something that I built from the ground up. It was a passion for me. It was my purpose. I helped a lot of men. I helped myself, figuring out who I was, and it was something that really kept me sober. And making that decision to kind of close up shop was difficult, right? Because that was the identity that I created for myself.
And maybe that's what Creator was doing. He's like, no, man, you're not going to have that identity. I need you to be more autonomous and go help people in a bigger capacity somewhere else, and I'm not going to tell you what it looks like.
I couldn't agree with you more. Looking back at it now, yeah, when I was in the moment, I mean, there was, a lot of fear that came out. But again, trusting the process, I've learned that a lot of times in my life, even in my active addiction, and I've been in a lot of uncomfortable situations where I've had to trust the process, and when I can look back at it and not as much emotion is attached to it, it's beautiful. It's the way that it was supposed to be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's so much easier to get into the flow once you know how to get into the flow, which you obviously have. Mm-hmm. One thing I'd like to mention is you talked about the Recovery Capital Conference, and you've been here, and it's separate from when I say the Recovery Capital of Canada, Calgary, Alberta. I kind of coined that just based on where I've been in the country and what I've seen and my experiences, and I see Calgary as like a leader in it, right? And then I found out there was a Recovery Capital Conference. And then I found out it was actually in Calgary, but the things have no tie to each other. It was just something that I had kind of coined as something I wanted to kind of make happen, and coined it on Instagram and blah, blah, blah. But it has no relation really to that conference, although that conference it's pretty deadly. I was at it this year, and I was at it the year before. And, you know, as much as I can tear things apart, I got to say that I think that thing is doing some good things. You weren't there this year?
I was there this year. Yeah, I was representing
right.
On a Dime, so I was there kind of in that capacity. All the other times I've gone on my own. You know, and just to that point, I think one of the reasons, and this is my personal belief, but why Calgary is, you know, the recovery capital, is because a lot of people and organizations here are working together. They're not working in silos. They're not working really against each other. People are more open-minded to connect to create that impact.
Mm-hmm. Would you say some of the experiences back in BC, maybe in Vancouver, does it get cliquey, and do people like just want to keep things to themselves?
A lot of people are working in silos, a lot in the nonprofit sector, because there's only a certain amount of money that is allocated for certain organizations. So there is a fear-based. You know, one of my mottos is collaboration over competition, but I feel like there's a lot of competition in BC in terms of, you know, helping people in the recovery aspect. You know, I hate to say it, but there's no shortage of people that are suffering. Right. And it's only going to get worse. And if we don't work together, we're working against each other. And the result is, as you know, is people are dying. Our loved ones are dying. Our family members are dying. Mm-hmm. Strangers are dying. And that's not changing anytime soon, I don't feel.
Mm-hmm. And, you know, I know that you are working with Pivot, which is your own company. You're working in collaboration a little bit with On a Dime and doing some other really great things. But I know you're working with a number of the local treatment centers all together here, correct?
Mm-hmm, yep.
What are you doing with them?
Well, partially with On a Dime. So we're running facilitation and curriculum for individuals who are kind of coming into second stage treatment and helping them discover who they are, what the value they bring to the world through their unique brilliance, and how they can find their purpose, whether that's just a JOB to support their recovery, whether that's a whole new career, of a passion, or whether that's just a journey of wellness or health or getting back to a place that they want to be.
Mm-hmm. And on a more personal note with Pivot, which is you're the creator of Pivot, you're the CEO of Pivot.
Yeah.
You have your mom and your auntie working with you.
Yeah, that's correct. And we've started to build a pretty strong team. BC and Alberta now. So it is a nonprofit, Pivot Empowering and Education Recovery Society. So our short acronym is PEERS. And how that kind of started was, you know, when I started CRC, having a lot of guys come in, the family members, the moms, the dads were calling me, and they didn't understand how to deal with the addiction, how they were enabling these individuals and hurting them further, and how to detach with love, right? So kind of combining a little bit of the intervention practices, a little bit of the Al-Anon practices, and then creating a safe space for these family members to understand that by enabling their loved ones, they're actually slowly killing them. Mm-hmm. So that was kind of the story of how Pivot started, and then it's kind of just taken off. We've done some curriculum stuff. We've put on a really, really cool, I don't want to call it a play, but basically what we did is we took 10 youth individuals who are suffering from addiction, trauma, sexual abuse, and they told their stories to another 10 youth who then shared those stories through creative song, dance, poetry, and it basically protected the anonymity of the victims, and it shared what they were actually going through in real time through, you know, song, dance, music, poetry, all that kind of stuff.
What a beautiful thing, man. Mm-hmm. And was that a one-time thing?
That was a one-time thing. It was called Youth on the Edge. And we, you know, explained to the community members, the mayors, the police that were there, you know, head nurses at the hospital, because they didn't understand what these youth were going through. Mm-hmm. So once we were actually able to share it in that way, it was really magical. And you know, I'm looking at doing something here in Calgary, kind of replicating that, you know, showcase, because it was just absolutely beautiful.
Yeah, dude, sounds amazing. I got tingles when you were when you were talking about it. I'm trying to swear less So that's why I said, oops.
It's a practice.
It really is. And when you've heard many of my other old episodes on audio only, you can see why I'm trying to reel that in a bit and make this more professional because it's video. And I wanted to really get out there and really, really push the envelope of, people's minds. And another thing you're doing with Pivot is this boxing venture. Mm-hmm. What's that?
Yeah, so Gloves Not Guns. Basically, we started this as we seen the increase with youth, Canada-wide, involved in swarmings, these attacks. These kids are carrying bear spray. They're carrying airsoft guns that are looking exactly the same as real handguns. And these kids are just in this intense violence that's basically fueled by social media beefs. And we wanted to give them an outlet. And so basically what we're doing is having a lived experience speaker come in, connect with the kids, not from a law enforcement lens, but from a lived experience lens. And we do basically an hour of fitness, boxing, no contact, and a little bit of self-defense to really give them that outlet. I mean, sometimes kids just want to punch stuff and they just want to get that anger out. And then after that, we have about 45 minutes of life skills. So we teach them, self-confidence, emotional regulation, how to de-escalate a conflict, a little bit of the gang prevention stuff, some of the digital safety. So really, it's not about boxing or fighting per se. It's about understanding a discipline, understanding that self-confidence. And if these kids have self-confidence, then, they have the ability to say no and walk away when a fight or a street beef comes up. Or they can jump in for their friends and say, hey, stop. This is not how we behave. And I feel like the youth don't really have a voice lately. They're kind of just being told what to do, what to think. And it's an opportunity for them to speak and have their own voice and be heard. And then we give them a mentor to help them through some of the challenges. Right?
Dude, that's amazing. On that, I'd like to say, I work with a lot of older people in addictions and recovery. And I think the biggest success that I've had as a helper to try to help people build a new life and see themselves in a different light and move on the good path is it's a spiritual process, and using the creator or higher power as the main springboard for their life moving forward. And also looking at their past, looking at their traumas and, just really uncovering and discovering and then recovering. For an older person, they're going to do it that way typically, I find. But a lot of the younger people I've worked with, they won't buy into it quite as early, the spiritual way, the spiritual disciplines, and, they're not ready for it. Right? There's a lot of ego left still to explore, I guess is a good way to say it. And I think what you're doing is such a great thing because you're allowing them to just be kids, to explore their ego side and their spirit side at the same time. And you're giving them outlets and you're giving them good mentorship and you're still instilling good values and beliefs within them. And they're going to have to live their life. And what you're doing is you're giving them all the tools at a young age to maybe not have to get to that point where they have to find a guy like me at 40 years old and follow this spiritual discipline path or die, right? So do you see it similar?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, a lot of these kids, they see what's on social media and they think that that's reality, right? And a lot of times they just need someone to believe in them. If they have an idea or they want to start a business or they want to become a rapper, it doesn't really matter. It's whatever fuels them. And as long as they have someone that says, absolutely, you can do that if you put your mind to it, and I'm here to support you and I'm going to consistently show up for you. These youth are our future generation. They're going to be our future leaders. And if we don't invest in them now, and I'm not talking dollars, I'm talking, mentorship, experience, and love, right? And love can mean a lot of different things. We're going to be in trouble, right? And I'm not, I don't go in when I go speak to schools or speak to these youth, I don't go in and say, don't do drugs, don't join gangs, because, when someone told me not to do something, I know the first thing I did was go try it out, right? So it's more of, this is what will happen, or this is what happened to me when I made those poor choices. You're going to come to a point in your life where you're going to be faced with a decision to make. And if you make X, Y, and Z, you're going to end up probably in the young offender center or in jail or dead. If you make this other choice, which is probably harder, but your life's going to be easier in the long run, right? So it's really about supporting these kids for where they want to go and then empowering them to make the right choice.
Have you run into any of these youngsters that have expressed like true vulnerable aspects of abuse, and they finally have been able to open up about it or anything? Because we were talking prior to the podcast getting open today with Tammy, who I interviewed earlier on another subject matter, but us three were talking about how a lot of the root of addiction is sexual abuse. Have any of the kids opened up in those areas?
You know, I can't speak too much to that. I can share my own experience, what happened with me with that. I really hope that some of these kids will open up. I don't think we've created some psychological safety and some safe spaces, but it takes time for that. For me, it took me 30 years to understand that my sexual abuse, you know, made me make poor decisions throughout my whole life, right? And, you know, like what was mentioned before, I blocked it out. I didn't think about it. I didn't understand it. And it wasn't until literally doing a back to basics step group that I was able to forgive the people who harmed me and understand that it wasn't my fault that it happened, but it was my responsibility to make sure that I didn't behave in a way because of what happened to me.
Roger. And use that as your excuse for the rest of your life.
I used it as my excuse for my addiction. I used it as an excuse for my behavior, the way that I treated women, the way that I treated everybody. And the hardest part was I didn't even realize that that was because of my sexual abuse. I just thought that I was an angry kid or that I was a victim of circumstance. But again, it was my responsibility to understand what had happened to me, to heal from it, and to forgive and let go. Because when I was carrying around that resentment, I mean, when I first moved back to the town where it happened, you know, I was strapped up ready to go look for these guys and do some serious damage. And it wasn't until this old timer that literally told me to put it in my hand and give it to God. And I was like, you know?
Yeah.
And that's literally what saved my life, right? Because if I had made a decision on the emotion from my childhood of what had happened to me, we wouldn't be sitting here doing this podcast today.
100%. So on that note, let's go back. Let's go back into your story. What did you grow up like? What did your young years look like?
So, you know, it's hard to say because it looked like I had a great childhood, lots of adventure. My dad, you know, he'd have me in the backpack skiing and put me in some pretty unsafe but adventurous times. My parents got divorced when I was, you know, 3 or 4 years old. I thought that was my fault. I was an only child growing up. I was a loner. And then, you know, when the sexual abuse kind of happened from a neighbor, you know, I just kind of turned into this angry little child, right? And that affected me. I was bullied in high school.
How old were you when that happened?
I was about 5 or 6 years old, right? And yeah, it was, again, it wasn't my fault, but it's my responsibility to share about it. Men don't usually talk about sexual abuse, right? And it just created this little unhappy child, right? As soon as that happened, I was like disconnected and I couldn't talk to anyone about it. I didn't even understand it, right? High school or, you know, early high school, I was bullied, you know, just for being an only child and for whatever the reasons that kids get bullied, you know, I checked all the boxes until I started fighting back, right? And I used that anger to defend myself. And all that got me, you know, 15 years old, I was kicked out of high school. I was kicked out of my house. I was basically homeless with no education and I had to figure life out.
Were you doing any drugs or anything at that point?
I was smoking weed. I mean, my first experience with alcohol, I think I was 12 years old and I ended up in the hospital with my stomach pumped, right? That was my first ever experience. To a normal person or not an alcoholic, that would have been enough to turn them off. But to me, that was just my start.
Yeah, I was like, okay, that was a good little thing. I want to feel like that again.
I want to feel. I didn't feel the pain that I felt every day when I drank or used drugs. It was my escape. It wasn't the problem. It was my solution.
And so the violence became a coping mechanism, and you suffered great consequences because of it out of school and got kicked out of your home, or was getting kicked out of your home and out of school alcohol and the anger?
I mean, when I look back at it now, any problems with law, with people, I tie back to my alcoholism, right? Because if I was in a normal state of mind, I wouldn't behave that way.
When you were in a normal state of mind, were you still angry?
All the time.
And so they were correlated, really.
Mm-hmm.
You're suppressing the anger and the pain with the alcohol, but all your troubles you got into was because of the alcohol.
Because I was masking the trauma.
Roger.
Yeah.
Okay. So for me, similar, minus the sexual abuse as a child, I had anger issues all through my growing up. And what I look back at it as, I needed to navigate life because there was so much anger in me. I used it as a tool, and that tool actually got me places. It worked, right? Just like the alcohol and the drugs worked until they didn't work, the anger worked until it didn't work. But I started getting payoffs from the anger. People gave me respect. You were getting bullied. I got bullied a number of times, and being Indigenous in a white world, it kind of goes part and parcel with growing up. But I started getting some type of level of respect. And I wouldn't say it's like respect in a spiritual sense. It's respect in more of a world of the material sense, where people aren't coming at me anymore. And I feel more powerful in a negative way, really. And women, they wanted that angry guy, and they liked that guy. And so I was able to get girlfriends out of that, and so it's used as a tool for me to navigate life. But the thing about me using that tool to navigate life, I can look back at it now. I dishonored myself every time I punched someone out. And honestly, TJ, every time I got into a fight or it was about to be a fight, I never wanted to be in that fight. But my reputation preceded me, and almost people would come to me just to fight me because they wanted that one up on, I'm going to take down this guy. And so I had to live up to that, even though 99% of the time, bro, I never wanted to. How about yourself in those types of situations?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, looking back at it now, I realize, anger is a tool. It's a survival tool. It's a defense mechanism. For me, anger was fear. I was afraid of things when I was angry, but that's what kept me alive in some situations, right? And same thing. The anger, the violence, people were, I created this vision where people were scared of me, and that's what kind of got me through. Whether that was through when I worked 10 years on the rigs and became a driller, and I used that anger to get what I wanted and to get people to listen to me. And then when I got involved in the gang life and doing collections and that whole violent lifestyle, that anger was all that I had. Right. And I could go into a situation with that anger and know that I would come out on top. But the problem is it was almost like a hangover, right? I would go and I would use that violence or that anger to get a certain situation handled. And then I would go home or after the situation, I would have this huge guilt that would weigh over me. Mm-hmm. So I was living like a double life, because now I'm this spiritual, connected, pretty healthy male. I'm a gentle man. And then I was just this violent wild card that would react. And then I would have this guilt hangover for the things that I'd done. Right.
Would you say guilt and shame?
At first, until I learned how to turn the shame off. Right. Not saying I didn't deal with it after. Once I started doing my steps and my step 4 and some of my amends and really unpacking what that was about, yeah. But I was able to turn that switch off.
So would it be fair to say you think you can turn it off, and you did for the purpose of survival and trying to avoid it, but underneath the surface, would you agree that you can't really turn it off, and you will suffer the consequences of those actions even though you think you turned it off?
Underneath the surface, there's no switch.
Right.
It's there. There's no way to turn it off.
Right.
And I would turn it off until I couldn't. That's where my drug use and my alcoholism spark back up again. Because there was years where I had it kind of under control, quote unquote, but until there was that time when it was so bad, that's all I had, right? And that just spiraled me, right to the point where I put a gun in my mouth and pulled the trigger.
Okay, so kind of going back to those teenage years, and you're walking through life and you're getting booted out of school and you got nowhere to live, and, kind of take us through those next few years. I know you did move to Alberta to do rig work at some point, and I know that you got into the gang life, but I don't know exactly when and how. Can you kind of walk us through those early 20s into your late 20s?
Yeah, for sure. So, I got kicked out at 15. I found this little cabin in the woods that this guy was renting that used to be a grow op. So when I moved in there, I just took it over, and he kind of mentored me in how to grow, really good weed and how to package it and sell it and everything. So I did that. And that was basically my career from 15 to 17. And basically, again, my alcoholism or trauma burned every bridge in that small community. Left, lied about my age. I was 17, came to Alberta, got a job on the rigs, and then I started that whole life. And I missed, my high school graduation, my prom, all the kind of fun things that a teenager has. I was here in Alberta working on a drilling rig in -40 and, in the summer of like +35 and all the bugs, and in a toxic work environment where everyone was drinking, everybody was high, everyone hated being there. You have crazy dangerous equipment around. And it was basically like going to war when I go out and do these hitches and do this work. And I did that for 10 years. By the end of that, I had a house, I had a couple vehicles, I had, kind of the life, and then the recession hit, right? I think it was 2008 or something, and everything crashed, and I, went back to what I knew.
Which was?
Selling drugs and, being a heat bag, right?
Out here,
yeah, in the Red Deer, Sylvan Lake area. And I got clicked up with some guys there, and that just took off, a big part for me, even the rig lifestyle, working on a crew, working with guys, I just wanted to feel a part of. I just wanted to have guys that were like, I got your back no matter what, whether it was on the oil rigs and we had a situation and we had to get through it. And that's what really drew me to that gang life, was having guys that have my back. I remember the first time I really got arrested within that gang lifestyle. My house was just about to get raided. I was in jail, and all these guys came to my house. They cleared out my house. They moved my vehicles. They took my cameras out to protect me from if the police came and got all that evidence. And that to me really like fueled that feeling of this brotherhood, that I have these guys that no matter what are going to ride for me. And I was expected to do the same. And I wanted to do the same.
And you're in your 30s at this point?
I was in my 20s. Yeah, mid-20s.
Mid-20s.
And, I did that for, a couple years, and everything, I hate to say, but, some of the stuff that you really see in the movies was some of the stuff that really went down. Everything from large gun shipments that go across Canada to large shipments of cocaine to the extortion to the kidnapping. I had an incident where, alleged someone got kidnapped and at my house and they escaped. And next thing I know, I got Alberta law enforcement team showing up at my house with AR-15s and the whole 9 yards and arrested me, cleared out my house, and I was looking at 10 years in jail. And that was a decision that I had made.
Holy shit, bro. That's some serious stuff. And you're tied into the gangs. You're moving drugs. You're moving guns. Are you in prostitution?
Yeah, we had a couple rings of women that we were running out of the area, and it was more of a protection thing. But it was all there.
And it's all part and parcel, right? And again, I'm going to point out a couple things to our viewers in this story. TJ is learning from, you're a young man joining the rigs. You're learning all your women ideologies and women coping strategies through sick men, right? And I know from working with people, a lot of young men end up going to older men and learning their behaviors for women, and then we get these sick ideas of what women are to us and for us. And I'm sure you got some of that along the way.
Yeah, I mean, you can rewind it way back to my parents getting divorced. My dad cheated on my mom on a ski trip that we went on, a family ski trip to Quebec. Just my mom and I came home. I had no idea what was happening. Then there's another woman moving into our family home. Me and my mom are out in a trailer somewhere, gone. And that was my first, experience with a healthy family, was my dad cheating on my mom. I didn't even realize this till years later, how this affected my life, my relationships, how I thought love was for women. And it took a lot of self-reflection to understand that we're all equal.
Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of men, and the men listening, you should listen up. We possess women. We think they're for us. And then pornography does that also. And we get a skewed version of what a relationship is and what a woman is to us. And we have to unlearn a lot about that aspect of life to get into a healthy relationship. And I say to a lot of the men that I work with, because a lot of the men have these issues, which is part and parcel of the addict or the alcoholic. I say, don't treat a woman like a woman, because your subconscious already is trained to treat them a certain way. You have to treat a woman like a human being, and you have to look at them like a human being. And when they're talking to you, you have to listen to the words. And it takes a lot of training to get some of the guys I've worked with in a zone where they're treating a woman like a human being, because of a lot of the subconscious patterns built through life and social media and pornography and, these experiences like you just kind of described. It's a crazy part of the subconscious that really needs rewiring.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, I tell a lot of these guys, I'm no expert, I'm an expert of what not to do. I'm just coming into, the last couple of years of what a healthy relationship can be. But I tell a lot of these guys, be the man you would want your daughter to bring home, right? Because that kind of gives them that different perspective, and, with the way the world is right now, with OnlyFans and pornography and the, breaking down of what a woman is, weak men watch porn, right? Weak men can't control their emotions enough to listen to a woman to understand, not to respond, right? And a relationship probably takes the most work out of anything. Mm-hmm. So, if you try to control, and I'm not here to give relationship advice or advice on women, but from my experience, the more you try to control a woman, the more she's going to leave.
Yeah.
You have to let her live her own life. You have to support her and empower her in that. And in return, it'll just naturally come back to you. Mm-hmm. Right.
And part of that is you can't try to get her to meet your incessant demands. You can't make her God. You have to stand on your own 2 feet, and you can't, expect to get everything you need from her. That's kind of like squeezing her through your fingers and then she's gone anyway. That's kind of the same part and parcel, right?
Absolutely. I mean, hurt people, right? I used to get into these relationships at such a low vibration and with so much trauma that I would just create hurt for myself, because I would end up getting hurt out of my own actions. But the worst part was I was hurting someone else, right? And I don't want to live my life hurting. I've hurt enough people. I've hurt myself enough that I don't want to live that way anymore.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, dude. And so a couple of the other things I wanted to get the listeners to kind of tune into was, as you come out of working in the rigs, you move into this gang lifestyle. And now you're back into a community of people that care about you, or seemingly, right? Hurt people. You're gravitating to something that making the money and survival. And now you're in the gang life, right? And you talked about the things that we see on the movies that you're actually living. And the brotherhood that you thought you got, was it really a loving brotherhood? Or, I work with a lot of gang members. I work in the prison system. I work at Drumheller Penitentiary, and that's where they send all the gang members. And they all have that belief that these guys got my back. And I have to have these brothers because they protect me back at home on the res or in the city or whatever. And I'm not saying that they don't have some love for each other, but a lot of the values underneath of it are broken values, and eventually it fails. What did you experience?
Yeah, I mean, it's a tricky one because, you know, I do a lot of, you know, gang prevention and stuff, but I also have a lot of friends that are still in that life. The friendship that we have tied now is not about anything to do with gang life. It's usually about them coming to me to say, hey, how can I live a better life? They may not necessarily want to leave that life, but they want to be sober, or they want to fix their relationship, or they want to be a better parent for their kid. You know, so I've met some really amazing people that are still in that life. They just don't know how to love themselves enough to get out. Right. And, you know, I remember when my house got shot up and, you know, someone shot 7 shots through my house a foot from where I was sleeping. I knew that I made a couple phone calls and I had, you know, 50 guys that were ready to figure it out. Right. That was a feeling that I've never had in my life, because at the time that was love to me. That was acceptance. That was people that no matter what, were going to do whatever they had to do because they cared about me. So to say that, you know, there's also a lot of fakeness in that world where people say they love you and they have your back, and it's to get what you have, or the jealousy. But, you know, some of the most genuine people that I've met have been in that life. They just don't know how to get out.
We'll get back to the podcast in a second. The opinions expressed on this podcast are solely of the guest sharing or myself. We have no affiliation with any 12-step or recovery program. And if you do like our work, please consider visiting BILLWARDLIFE and supporting what we do. Now back to the podcast. And no matter where we are in any situation, a human being has the capacity for love. And there's always love. It might be obscured by whatever. And so for me to paint a brush and say all these guys are like this, it's wrong. Because there's a lot of good humanness in all the bad that we do. And we can see that. But sometimes it's hard to break away from what we think love is, or from that person that we built that relationship with, who might be in that lifestyle and we still love them, but we want to move into a new direction. So you got shot up. How did you start? Did it get worse, or did you start moving in the right direction? Like, where do we go from here?
I mean, yeah, it got worse. After my house got shot up, I wouldn't leave without a gun, bulletproof vest everywhere I went, even if it was like to go to Walmart. The paranoia really set in.
Was it gang against gang?
Pretty much, yeah.
Okay.
I mean, basically, to break it down, it was someone owed me money. I was pushing to get that money, and they figured if they took me out, the debt would be gone, right? You know, and then, you know, the paranoia set in, the drugs set in more, the paranoia multiplied because of the drug use. And yeah, it got so bad. I again, like I said, I didn't want to live anymore. I hated who I was. I hated the things that I had done. I knew that wasn't who I was as a person, who my core values aligned, and I didn't know how to get out. So like I said, I took my gun, I put it in my mouth, I pulled the trigger, and the gun jammed. And, you know, I've told this story quite a few times. I've shot the gun many times after, not knowing why it jammed at that time, and all I could break it down to is higher power. That was my reason to take another chance at life, and that was the beginning of my journey to get sober, to get to where I wanted to be, even though I didn't know where that was. I knew that I didn't want to be in that life anymore.
Did you take it as a sign to get sober?
I did. Maybe not right away. You know, first thing I did after that kind of whole episode, and I, you know, dusted myself off and said, like, what is happening here, is I called my mom, and, you know, I put her through so much stuff. I wouldn't even let her come to my house. She would make it a point to come and visit me once every year, and I would put her up in a hotel with a rental car because I didn't want her staying at my house with what was happening and everything else. I called her after that, and all she told me, and my mom doesn't swear, and she said, get to a fucking meeting. She was pissed. She had enough. She had enough of my stuff, right? And that's what I did.
Did you know about meetings prior to this?
I did. I grew up in the rooms. My mom was.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, my mom was an addict. She went to treatment. She's, still in the program. She's 13 years sober now. And I grew up, I was a little kid who was running around the rooms that everyone was saying, shh, as the promises were being read, right? But I didn't, she would always tell me throughout my life, go to a meeting, go to a meeting. I hated hearing it. It drove me nuts. But it's that final desperation. I didn't know what else to do, right? And I had no choice but to die or go to a meeting, right? Because I was ready to try again. And I went to a meeting. I'll never forget. It was Red Deer. It was a men's group, about 50 guys, basement of a church. And I went in there and I heard my story. Every single person that shared, there was a piece of me within them. And I bawled. I was this gangster, wannabe, tough guy. And I sat in there and I listened to these stories and I just broke down. And that was, I didn't get it the first time. It's not like that first meeting I stayed sober until today, but it planted that seed. And I knew when I was in trouble mentally, I could call someone from the rooms.
Was that the first time you went to the rooms for you?
Absolutely. Yep.
When you were in conflict, living the gang life and doing the things that you were doing that went against your spiritual core values, were you aware enough to know that you were going against your spiritual core values, or were you just so disenchanted with yourself and so, for lack of a better term, so fucked up on the inside that you knew something needed to change, but you didn't know what? Or did you know you were going against your core values?
I knew. I think human nature, we know what's right and wrong. Part of me loved that life at first. My ego was huge, right? I put on, a certain piece of clothing or carried a gun or whatever. I felt untouchable. And that was an addiction in itself. But I always knew that it wasn't right. I always knew every time I left the house or had, a bag or whatever it was, that wasn't who I was meant to be. That wasn't who I was put on this earth to be. But I was able to turn it off until I wasn't.
So going back to the first 10 minutes of our conversation, I'd mentioned like some of these young men who you are now mentoring and working with, they have to go through the ego years, and the ego needs what it needs, and that ego part of life has to be lived, which is why it's so hard to work with the kids from just my version, my perspective, my experience. It's so hard to like plant the seeds of recovery in so many of the kids because they got to live through the ego life. And you're talking about, you really loved that. That's what I meant. You had to go through that. I had to go through it. I had to go through the money and the truck and the cars and the stuff. I didn't kind of go the direction you went, but I had to go through my own ego life to get to a point where I realized that that's not serving me anymore. And so you kind of did it in your own way. So you're in the meeting, 50 guys, they tell your story. You didn't get sober right away. Fucked around a little bit more, probably found out. What finally did it wasn't the gun in the mouth, right? That's not what brought you back after, meetings. What was it finally?
I mean, I don't know. You know how they say sometimes quickly, sometimes slowly? It'll always materialize if we work for it. That voice that you were talking about kept getting bigger. The voice inside saying that I was doing the wrong thing, that I wasn't aligning with my values, kept getting stronger, kept getting stronger. And, as the police kept kind of getting closer in and, I knew my chances were running out, it just became one decision after another to distance myself from that life. There's no way, and some of these young kids, I try to help them, there's no way to just, you have to make a decision that's black and white, but it takes just as long to dig a hole as it does to fill it. So it took me some time and some steps, and the more I went towards the light, I guess, the louder that voice got. The easier it got, the more opportunities the universe put in my path to get further and further away.
And as you got further and further away, how were some of the relationships to get away from? Because you built great bonds with a lot of these men and women and people, and your identity was tied there, and people must have been not happy you were moving away.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And, eventually I did have to cut ties, and cut those people right out of my life. And it wasn't because I didn't like them or because of anything other than that I had to look after myself and I had to get myself healthy. So I ended up moving from Alberta back to BC because that was the path of least resistance to get myself as far away from that lifestyle as I could.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it still followed me, right? I came to BC and started a new life, and there was some things that happened that to the outsider view would say that I was definitely still involved.
Mm-hmm.
Even though I had no part or no choice in it. It was things that happened.
Mm-hmm. And so then you go back, a little bit of residual consequence from your old life follow you to the outside viewer. Maybe you haven't changed, but internally you knew that you were on a new path. And I always say humility is within the beholder, not within the viewer. And you had the humility within the beholder of yourself to move in the direction that you needed to move in, regardless of what some of the outside people would have seen or thought. And then you get sober. Take us through your sobriety journey and into you starting a recovery house, because I know those two things weren't too far apart, really.
No, and I got some tough love, I guess, around that in the beginning. I mean, I went from driving a brand new Escalade on 28s to a 2006 Ford Fusion.
I get that.
Right? And that was a hit for me. But then once I got in recovery and actually really took it seriously and started telling my story and having people say, hey, your story helped me in my story, that was a feeling that, I mean, I can't really describe it. You know what it feels like, but that was the feeling that was my purpose in life. Mm-hmm. I don't want to say that was my new addiction, but that was what fueled me and motivated me to keep going, right? I had a little fitness business that I, took with me from that life that I started, and it wasn't fulfilling for me enough. I knew that more had to happen. I sold it, and I took everything that I own and I said, I'm going to start a treatment center in this town because there's not one here. My friends are dying. Someone has to do something. And it was my calling. And I mean, I think I started CRC, started building it. It took me almost a year to build, but I only had, 8 months sobriety.
Wow, dude.
And I had a lot of people in town say, this is going to be a train wreck. This is going to be a nightmare, mm-hmm. right? I took a lot of criticism for that. Mm-hmm. And I was down to my last $2,000 with no clients, no potential, no nothing. I was going to be out of money. My whole dream was going to be gone. And I jumped in my car and I drove out to Alberta and I spent my last, whatever it was, $600 on the Recovery Capital Conference. I came, I met some people. I ended up driving home with 2 clients. And that was how it started. Yep. I picked one up in Red Deer and I picked one up somewhere around Revelstoke. And that was the start.
Dude, how'd you find them?
I didn't. The universe did.
Right.
I was just the vessel. I was just there. And I was terrified when this guy was like, I'll come to treatment. And I was like, I have no idea what I'm doing.
Did you have a booth or anything?
No.
You just came to the Recovery Capital Conference?
Came to the conference, talked about what I wanted to do and my story. It wasn't anyone that I met directly at the conference. It was actually someone from my old life who said, hey, I see what you're doing now. Do you have any beds available? And then it was just, that was it.
Come here, spend your last $600 and you drive home with 2 clients and it begins.
And it began. And it was a rocky ride, but it kept me sober, right? Mm-hmm. I learned a lot. I had a lot of great experiences with a lot of great men and community people. I had a lot of people hate on me and try to bring me down and try to close the center and report me to the ALR, and they actually came out and did a full investigation and a surprise inspection, and it all just worked out.
Yeah, dude. I got a saying, when you work for God and the people work for you, and the universe aligns to lay the stepping stones of what you need in your path to take you to where you need to go. And nothing can really stop it. And that's the path you're on. And since then, the closure of the center on the coast is because of basically politics, government hurdles.
Basically, I mean, I felt like I kind of got as big as I could get there, you know, and not that it was about getting to be big and renowned, but I could only help 5 guys at a time, right? And I felt like more people needed help. You know, when I came out here, I kind of replicated it, and I had a couple beds open here, but it just, you know, I thought I wanted to. I thought that's the path, and the universe kept closing that door through different circumstances, you know, and now, you know, we're looking at opening a huge second stage house with some other guys to kind of free up the treatment system here, doing all this work with youth, doing all this work with On a Dime. You know, I went from helping, you know, maybe 5 guys at a time to probably, you know, 3-4 times that, you know, not that it's about the numbers or anything else, but the impact is growing.
No, and I think that's important, right? I listened to a book called Seed of the Soul. You ever heard of it?
Mm-mm.
It's a book that I've read twice, paper copy, and then I've listened to the audio probably 20 times. It's one of the books that I put on when I go to bed. I'll start it in a different spot. And it talks about these souls who are seeking the light, and he'll say capital L-I-G-H-T. And this author's amazing, and the book's amazing. And one of the things that he says is, you know, the souls are there to hit different levels of service. And he talks about the numbers. And as I kind of look at my journey and other people's journeys and kind of do, you know, observational comparisons, but not judgmental comparisons, it's like, yeah, man, the greater numbers we can hit, I think, is part of the journey. And hopefully, you know, you're able to impact thousands, but it doesn't matter the numbers really. But it talks about the brighter your light shines, the more people you can hit. And your light is shining bright. And I see you on social media doing your thing, and dude, you light me up. And not only are you impacting the direct people that you're working with, you're impacting people on your media as you post what you're posting, and you're inspiring me, dude, to be better and to do more. And more isn't the point either, but to just keep doing it. So, like, whatever you do, you help me in what I do. And I would like to think that whatever I'm doing, I'm helping somebody else in what they do. And I know that because people message me on Facebook and off my podcast and Instagram and just random shit saying, you have no idea what your posts do to help my life. And I didn't know it was doing that stuff, right? So whatever you are doing, dude, it's pretty amazing, and I'm loving it. So, and that's why I wanted you here, right? I know you talk about the haters and people trying to take you down, dude. I get it. I still got a lot of haters. I don't feel the people taking me down, and I honestly don't feel the haters. I know they're there because people tell me, but in the same breath, at some points it's given me fuel. But it's almost like I'm oblivious to it because it doesn't matter. Because the journey that I'm on, that you're on, it's about service and it's about moving forward and not looking at the people who aren't willing to even get in the ring and do the things we got to do. I know for me and I know for you, I'll let you speak on that, but the amount of work that I've put into doing what I do here today and what I do every day for my job, dude, it's been a 24-hour-a-day process. Even when I'm sleeping, it's almost like in active motion. And I don't know if people are willing to get into ring to do the things that I'm willing to do or that you're willing to do. Can you speak to what it takes to build and, you know, having no money at times and doing things that, you know, maybe we don't even want to do? What does it take for you?
I mean, for me, I have to know what my why is because if I lose my why, I lose all forward momentum. And it's a process. I mean, I used to care so much what other people thought of me. Now what other people think of me is none of my business. I used to be in competition with other people. Now I'm in competition with myself. That's all that matters, right? And I haven't been posting a lot on social media. I've been pretty quiet, you know, and I struggle with that too, because it's like, you know, the more message I share, the more people I can help. But at the same time, you know, if it's not fueling my soul, I can't be insincere, right? And just doing what we do, I mean, behind the scenes, it is a 24-hour thing. And there's, you know, I have, you know, what, 7 or 8 jobs right now. I only get paid for one of them, right? But that's because my why is louder than my no, right? And it's always going to be that way for me. It may look different, but I just have to keep going, because at the end of the day, and not to sound selfish, but by doing all this stuff, it keeps me sober. And that's my number one tool that I have to embrace, is keeping myself sober. Because if I'm not sober or living in a spiritual principle, I'm no good to anybody. And as soon as I get outside that realm, you know, I was nervous about moving back to Alberta, where some of my old territory and things happened. But because my why is so loud, none of that stuff matters.
That's beautiful, bro. So now you're back, you're doing the things, and you're not stopping. It's funny, last night I was working with one of the people that work for me, or work with me, I should say. I have a little group of people that really love what I do, and they want to help, and they will do anything to help. And as you do. And this person that I was working with, I'm building a program for CSC. I'm hoping to get, you know, some work from CSC. I've been approached by some people that work there that say, you should do this, and there's a need for this, and blah, blah, blah. So I've been, you know, I prayed on it for about 3 months, and came up in my meditations that I wanted to do this. And as I kind of build this foundation program of what it is, your work came up in our conversation last night with Pivot and with On a Dime. And you guys will be probably at least getting a call from us to see how we can work with you in what we're building. And I think that's a lot of the beauty of what you talked about earlier. Out here, we can collaborate and work together. And, you know, everyone in a sense is selfish because they're concerned about what they're doing, which I am and you are. But in the same breath, I know that I can come to you and go, dude, we're doing this for these men and women potentially. How can you help us? How can you help us? And, you know, so what you guys are doing, I'm able to look at what I'm doing and maybe utilize you. And it's kind of this big thing that just goes around like a ball of yarn, that we're all helping each other, and everything's connected, because everything is. And let's stay connected, and let's keep moving forward. But in the same breath, let's not hold on to something so tight and expect anything from each other, me and you. And I don't think that we have that relationship, right? And nor should anybody, really. Things need to come and go and morph and work the way that the universe has it. And then we don't get tied into what it should be. It is what it is supposed to be. And so, you know, I think we're going to wrap this up. But before we wrap this up, I'd like you to share to maybe some viewers or listeners on, you know, what's your message? Is your message to the youth? Is it to anybody? Is it to other entrepreneurs, or all of them? And what would you like to share? And if you could look into the camera to my right, which is your main camera, and just talk to the person and share the message that you would like to give an individual.
I guess all I can say really is that no matter what you're going through or where you think you are, that you're not alone, right? Because there's someone who has been through what you're going through and has come out the other side. Don't be afraid to ask for help, right? I was so afraid to ask for help, and you know, I was afraid of humility, and that was the thing that literally saved my life. So you're not alone, and ask for help. And if you don't know who to ask one of us, because we'll point you in the right direction. We may not have all the answers, but we have the resources and the love and the care to get you, started on that journey.
Mm-hmm. And where can they find you?
So you can go to pivotsociety.ca. You can go on Instagram. It's at coastal_recovery community. And that's about it. I have some other socials I'm working on getting started for Gloves Not Guns and for Pivot, but it's on my to-do list and we're working on it.
Yeah, dude. And honestly, bro, I really hope that one day me and you can collaborate and do something together. I'd like to see what the energy is, and let's just keep connecting and doing our thing. And I really thank you for coming on to the UDRcast, bro, and thank you so much.
Yeah, I
bro.
appreciate you for having me. And, we always have these great little side conversations. It's nice to kind of make it, official, but we'll definitely do something when the time's right. And, you always got a friend in me, and I always got your back.
Fuck yeah, bro.
Right on.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.